Okay, it's 11:01. Courtney, are we good to start?
I think we're good to start. Welcome everybody. Glad you could join us. We're going to get things kicked off so that we can maximize our time today. So Anthony, feel free.
Yeah, we have a full and a packed agenda, so let's go ahead and first we'll start off with the recap. So I'll pass it back, Courtney.
Yeah, so the recap of last meeting, and we won't go into too many details because we do make the recordings for these meetings available to members. But really, we talked a lot about COVID-19, obviously, because this is a safety task force and that's the top of everybody's mind today. We did a lot of question and answer in the last meeting, and then we also followed up by giving information for a webinar that we held for COVID-19. So Courtney Malvo hosted that webinar for us and took your all's questions and gave responses and is available for follow-up as well. The other few things we talked about was just a reminder of what this task force is, what our mission is, which is really to enhance the quality of safety leadership across Virginia. And we want to do that by, leveraging our experience and by instilling best practices, but also by staying on the cutting edge of safety so that we make sure that our membership is really prepared. So we discussed that a bit. Other than that, we talked really briefly about some transportation safety, some diversity and equity and inclusion safety, and we have resources for all that stuff that we're posting on our Microsoft Teams page and on our website. So if you all need access to that and you don't have it yet, feel free to reach out to myself or to Anthony and we can make sure that you have access to all that. I don't want to take too much time with the recap because I think we have a couple of guests today that are going to help us sort through some COVID-19 questions that you guys have submitted to us.
Yes, so before we introduce our guests, we do have Virginia OSHA here for a Q&A for some frequently asked questions, and you guys provided us some great FAQs last month, and we're going to continue to encourage you to send those to us. But I did share a link if you look in the chat. So what VOSH has been really good at is fielding these FAQs and helping companies be safe and compliant with this new emergency temporary standard. So without any further ado, we're going to introduce our guests from Virginia OSHA. We have Jennifer Rose. She's our VOSH Safety Program Director. We have Jeremiah Cruz. He's our coordinator for Virginia BEST and VPP, and BEST is the program through AGC of Virginia, and the VPP, if you're in the general industry side or a larger contractor, you should really reach out and look at that program as well through Jeremiah's. And then Bill Gross, he's our lead safety health consultant, and he wears a lot of hats and a lot of titles, so we thank all three of you for attending. And Courtney, I'll let you start asking. But before we get there, one of the questions that was asked last month, and we did find the answer for it, was does the requirement to report 3 or more positive cases within a 14-day period apply to one company or a shared site? For example, if we have a company in Richmond and we have another office location in Charlottesville, and we have 3 people in those 2 areas, 2 in Richmond, 1 in Charlottesville, do we have to report to Virginia OSHA? And the answer is no. It's by a site or a location. And that is on VOSHA's emergency, the link that I sent, part of the FAQs. So thanks for sending that one in last month. There are some few more that Courtney's going to ask.
So we're just going to dive right in. I will make a comment that I have everyone muted. There's a lot of people on the line. So if you have a follow-up question to what we're talking about, feel free to use the chat feature that can be found on that bottom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. I can't guarantee that we'll get to every question and discussion today, but please, we'll keep a record of those questions. That way we can do follow-up with our VOSH consultants. So keep that in mind. First question is, under the PPP section or PPE section in E, it states disposal. So will the face covering of someone who has had contact with probable or confirmed case of COVID-19 be considered infectious waste, requiring it to be regulated waste?
And the answer to that is no. This is Jennifer. It is not considered regulated waste.
Perfect.
Yeah, and that even goes back to EMS. EMS basically says unless you can squeeze droplets out of it, it's not regulated waste. So
Very
this is,
good.
yeah.
All right. So the standard states that a return to work policy for a previously positive employee can be symptom-based, test-based, or other reasonable options that involve consultation with appropriate healthcare professionals. Would the Virginia Department of Health meet the definition of healthcare professional? So if an employee tested positive and does not have an established relationship with a physician, and the employer is allowing the employee to return to work using the symptom-based method, would VOSH consider it mandatory to provide the employee with a consultation with the healthcare professional at the employer's cost?
No. And the reason, the main point to get across in that is that VDH cannot serve as that the person who can say yes or no, they can go back to work. That's going to either come from a healthcare professional, a doctor, nurse, things like that, that the positive person has gone to and gotten the okay from them, or you can use that symptom-based test, which allows the employer to to look at those symptoms, and as long as they meet those definitions and the standards, they are allowed to come back to work.
Okay, so kind of tagging on to that, somebody had asked about, the CDC and how it changed its guidance with regard to symptom-based strategies from exclusion for a 10-day after symptom onset and resolution of fever for at least 3 days to exclusion for 10 days. That doesn't make any sense. 10 days after symptom onset and resolution of fever for at least 24 hours. So can you just talk real briefly about the difference in the VOSH guidelines versus the CDC guidelines in that return to work policy?
Sure. The standard was written prior to the time that the CDC changed their recommendations. And basically the guidance that we're giving to employers is that they are allowed to follow that new CDC guidance. And there is actually a section in the standard that talks about employers that they can follow the CDC requirements, as long as it's similar to the requirements in the emergency temporary standard. And this is one in particular that the interpretation has been that the employer can follow the CDC guidelines as opposed to the older ones that are in the emergency temporary standard.
Perfect.
So to be clear, the old CDC guidelines said that you had to, if you were positive, you had to have no symptoms for 72 hours. That was the CDC guidelines. That's what VOSH was saying. And now it's 24 hours. So VOSH recognizes the CDC updates.
So if an employee who previously was positive for COVID-19 but has no fever for 3 days and no respiratory symptoms returns to the doctor and receives a negative test result, but is denied access to a second after a 24-hour period because of testing supplies being limited, would VOSH consider this a good faith effort to comply?
This could be in compliance because it does give that test-based or the symptom-based. So as long as you meet those requirements of the symptom-based process in the standard, then that could be considered as okay to come back.
All right. The training requirement indicates a list that represents comprehensive training. In view of the health risks in gathering in person for training right now, is a written document distributed for employees to read with this information effective?
The standard doesn't specify what format the training has to be in. We have provided the PowerPoint presentations available on the webpage that meet the section 80 of the standard for training. The employers are not necessarily required to do that, but there are requirements in standard section 80 of what has to be covered in a training program. And so, as long as they're making sure that there's all those requirements are included in the training program, the standard doesn't require doesn't specify the format of that. But it does, however, either way, has to be documented, and you include the day that either the instructor provided it or however it was presented to the employees, and then the date as well as the employee name and signature. One thing I would caution, if they are doing just strictly the handout, the standard does only allow for excuse me, for lower exposure risk employees to use that handout, which is available on the webpage. But like I said, the format doesn't necessarily have to be the same, but I would caution you with doing just a written procedure for the training of everyone else, just because there's no real way to determine the efficacy of the program, and if they understood that, because there's not any requirement in the standard to do knowledge tests or anything like that, but it's just, there's that potential for the employees not getting all that full information. So the best practice would be to provide some sort of training, and this doesn't necessarily have to be in person. This can be, like I said, using the PowerPoint, virtual, things like that.
So I'll piggyback off that. I did share the link Jennifer had alluded to the training materials that VOSH has provided. And in there is a template of a training roster, and it has everything that VOSH is expecting. So I'd encourage you just to use theirs. If you want to put your logo on top of it, then that's fine. But they pretty much made it cookie cutter for us to comply. So I would encourage you to go to that link and to see their training roster and the training material.
And as Anthony said, we do have information up there. The document listed as medium risk level training, that is actually a PowerPoint presentation that, as long as the employer goes in and fills in the blanks about what specifically they're doing at their site, then that would be considered to be in compliance with Section 80 of the standard. There are 2 other PowerPoint presentations on there that don't necessarily meet the requirements of 80, but we put them on there just for more informational purposes. One of them is a really long presentation. I think it's over 100 some slides. That basically just goes through the requirements of standard. So just covering the requirements of the standard is not enough to cover the Section 80 for the training requirements, as well as the PowerPoint on there that I believe it's called Overview. Again, this is just an overview of the standard. It doesn't get into the specifics like the requirements to train employees on what the standard says on, transmission, things like that, and specific to your written program. So those medium exposure risk levels can and should, use that PowerPoint presentation. Basically, it's already done for you.
And yeah, and last month we provided sort of a checklist of all the things that are required for the medium and high risk exposure. And so I would encourage you to go back and look at that, or reach out to Courtney and me if you need a copy of that.
Does the standard require, does it require written certification that identifies the workplace evaluated, the person performing, and the date performed for every work site, including like multiple job sites?
You're talking about a hazard assessment, not the training documentation, right?
I don't know, actually. The question doesn't specify.
Okay. So for the training documentation, it is required for where you're documenting that every employee has been trained. It has to be documented and include the employee name as well as their signature. So this is something that would have to be documented, obviously, per work site or whatever, basically per employee, essentially, whatever work site they're working on. There are requirements for a written hazard assessment to be done, and that can be done per task. So you may have a contractor that's doing the same electrical tasks on multiple sites, or on each site. You could have just a generic electrical, whatever the task is, and that can be applied to whatever site. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have a specific hazard assessment for that site, but it should cover the job tasks that are going on that site. For example, you could have one site where they're at the demolition stage, so you're going to have different tasks there as opposed to one where you're framing or roughing in, anything like that. You'd have to look at the specific tasks for that work site, but like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hazard assessment document per work site.
Okay, perfect. So going back real quick to PPE. So the standard says cloth face coverings are not PPE, but are they acceptable PPE on medium risk construction sites?
Yeah, if you look at, let's see, 60B1K, it talks about other control measures for those medium risk employees, which is, these are all in addition to pre-screening and face coverings for anyone that comes onto your site that may be having those symptoms or known to be. Staggered shifts. They also give some other examples of controls. And one of them that it talks about in B1K is where it allows face coverings based on the PPE hazard assessment. So as long as there aren't not any tasks there that would require the use of a respirator or you know, surgical mask, things like that, then those face coverings could be used as one of several controls that would meet the requirements for that medium risk.
Hey, Jennifer, that's actually in C1K.
Oh, C1K. Okay, I'm sorry.
C1K, yeah. It requires employers to provide the employees with wear face coverings who, because of their job task, cannot feasibly practice physical distancing, or other employees from other persons for a hazard assessment determined. So it doesn't necessarily have to be it can just be a face covering. So.
Okay, great, thank you. So different folks are taking different approaches to the risk assessment. Some are getting way in the weeds of breaking it out by tasks, others with a broader stroke of job description. So that he's still not clear on how are they to define the task to be assessed. The initial thought was to pull them from the individual job descriptions, but that could either be too detailed, not detailed enough. They're envisioning a document over 100 pages long, and the assessment process taking way longer than they need to meet the standard. I think that kind of ties in with what you're talking about now, but any additional feedback you can give on these risk assessments and how detailed they need to be to the job?
You can do sort of an overall assessment if you have, you know, a job description that pretty much has them doing the exact same things without any sort of extenuating circumstances, which would put them up into a higher exposure risk level. And if that were the case, you know, you'd have to include those specific extra tasks, basically. But you could have them by job category, as long as you've looked at sort of a generic, okay, our electricians are doing X, Y, Z. These are all medium, but you know, they may have a task that puts them up into the higher or the high exposure risk level. So that particular task would need to be covered, but you wouldn't necessarily have to do a line item per job task that all of the electricians are doing.
Okay. I think if there's any other questions that anybody that's on the line has about the risk assessment and the job descriptions and things like that, if you want to go and type that question into the chat or even unmute yourself to ask before we kind of move on past that topic, that'd be great. Seems like everybody's clear on that one. That's good.
That one can be, so you really want to make sure that you're out there and evaluating it. This cannot be done from behind a desk. We have general knowledge, but we really want to be out there, boots in the ground, to make sure we are evaluating this in person, because we have to certify that we've done this. So they do give instructions on that link to the hazard assessment under your training material. There's a Word document guide as well that you can follow.
Somebody did ask, what would be a high risk task for an electrician, like as an example?
That was strictly an example. I don't know specifically what they do, but I'd be hard pressed to find something that where they would be having that contact within 6 feet of known persons with the virus. So that was probably a bad example, but I'm just saying if you have, you know, for example, the same with the lower to the medium risk, you know, that's more likely what you're going to see, because that high risk is medical industry. But that's the purpose of the example was that you could go from one exposure level to the next higher level.
So,
hey, Anthony, so some of it comes with working in hospitals. You know, UVA, VCU, Winchester Medical, you know, all the hospitals where they have known COVID cases or possibly known COVID cases. So those could put you in the higher risk.
yeah, for instance, we have technicians who service at healthcare facilities who might go directly from a low exposure to a high exposure if they're going to be working in an airstream of potentially infectious disease, or clogged waistlines, doing something like that matter. So in those situations, we really want to make sure that we're following what the guidelines are. And one of those guidelines is, and Vosh, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we need a pre-screen. So we need a pre-screen whenever we're doing the medium and high exposure. Can you comment on that?
You are correct. That medium and above does require that pre-screening each shift for employees that are working on that site. Yes.
One question that was submitted is the general contractor, is it the general contractor's responsibility to do an assessment on the subcontractor's work? Shouldn't the subs do their own?
It is per company, so each employer would be expected to do one.
So there's no liability to the general contractor if a subcontractor has an issue that's out of compliance?
It would go along with any other standard where you have that responsibility of the general contractor as the overseeing person of the site. But typically when you look at written programs like that, it is, the general contractors can show that they're not, necessarily going through the specific details of the subcontractor's paperwork. It would be similar to like if there were a fall protection hazard where the general contractor would be able to easily recognize that, and then they potentially could be cited as the general contractor or as the supervising contractor. But like I said, with paperwork, you're probably not going to have that as much liability. And I don't want to get into specifics about, whether or not they will or won't get cited, but they do, it would be less responsibility for that paperwork as opposed to a physical hazard that they'd be able to see on a daily walkthrough.
Okay. Someone asked about, is there a manual with all the guidelines and requirements required to be in compliance? I believe there is, and that's a link we can share. Is that correct?
The manual is the standard.
That's
basically.
the standard.
Yeah, that's everything that's required is in the standard.
So there's a manual and a 100-page long.
Right.
I sent another link to it. So Vosh's also have a resources page. So it's a separate link. I mean, if anyone loves information, there's a lot of it in those links.
Next question I've got is if the employers need to work closer than 6 feet or more than brief contact, and the face coverings are not acceptable administrative or work practice controls, what are we expected to do for 1 in an office setting and then 2 on the construction site?
Well, the face coverings are allowed because you're talking about medium employees. So if you go to the C1K again, it talks about requirement for employers to provide employees face covered if they're going to be in that space. Offices, some places are teleworking people or limiting the number of people that come in the office that day, doing job rotation, stuff like that. So there's many different ways. The thing to look at is you got to look at your medium risk exposure, what you're exposed to, and then go with the PPP there. I think everybody really got confused about it had to be respirators or N95s or something else like that when they talked about face coverings not being PPE. But in K, it basically says your hazard assessment is determined that personal protective equipment such as respirator masks and surgical gas may not be required for the job task if you're just sitting in an office. And even construction workers wearing the gaiters, wearing just face coverings, stuff like that. So, yeah, to that point, face coverings are neither PPE nor respirators, but they are required in some situations. For instance, but let me back up and say, for medium exposure, we cannot say that that's an acceptable work practice control that gets the exposure to low levels. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
So what you want to do is I think you and me talked about this, Anthony, about, on construction sites, there's 4 guys around a plan table all wearing face masks. There don't need to be 4 guys around a plan table. Get the supervisor around the plan table and he can go talk to each individual, individually, where you're not exposing all those people just because they have face coverings on. So
yeah, where you don't need the PP or the face cover. So one situation that was brought up, and I want to make sure we address, is while riding in vehicles, company vehicles, in order to be a passenger, multiple people, it did kind of make people think the standard was saying that respirators and face coverings, but Vosh has recently said that respirators are not required to carpool. Is that correct?
Correct. But we're also providing guidance as to additional things that can be used in addition to those face coverings. We have contractors, some of them doing requirements to make sure they open the windows, looking at spacing if you have like a larger van or something where you could space out and look at occupancy. But there's a couple of other things that you can be doing in addition to those face coverings. But yes, correct, the N95s are not required.
So is there an occupancy limit? Is there a required spacing, duration?
No, and that's, I mean, it's pretty understood that you're not going to be able to maintain 6 foot of distance in a car, or even like a van or something like that. But, you'd want to do the best you can as far as occupancy of it. If it's something where you can feasibly do twice as many vehicles and half as many people in there, that would be an option, but there's no real guidance on what the occupancy has to be or the distance has to be, because that is specific to the vehicle and the employees that are riding in that vehicle.
And disinfection, is there?
That would be an important part of it. Yes, making sure that there are procedures in place for cleaning and disinfecting. And obviously, the employees would want to make sure that they are aware of the requirement set forth by the employer. Things like the face covering. If you're requiring opening windows, if you're requiring them to use hand sanitizer before they get in, disinfect the seats, whatever your policy is that needs to just make sure that the employees are aware of that.
So does the training requirement apply to all employers, or is there an exemption for employers with less than 10 employees?
The full-blown training requirement is for employers in the very high, and medium risk level. The only requirements for that lower as far as training goes is that they have to provide the employees with an informational sheet, which is available on the webpage. It's basically just a 1 or 2 page fact sheet. It's not really necessarily the full-blown PowerPoint presentation, but as far as the size goes, it is all employees, all employers with any size employees. The only exception that you get into when you're talking about less than 10 employees is there is an exception for the requirement to have a written plan that is required only for medium employees that have 11 or more employees.
Perfect, great. So for the pre-screening, should that be done every day, or is weekly enough for compliance?
The standard does say before every shift.
For every shift, okay. Are certain signage, is there certain signage that's mandatory for medium hazard employers on job sites, or any informational signs that need to be posted?
The only signage requirements that are required by our standard are for those common areas, and that's D1A, where you're having to list those 4 things, such as the occupancy level, the reminder for physical distancing and hand washing, and then whatever your policy is for cleaning and disinfecting. That's the only posting per se. We have available mini posters on the webpage. There's actually an infographic that can be posted, but the only requirements in the standard are for that posting at common areas. It could be a best practice to have postings just to keep things on people's mind on a regular basis, but those necessarily aren't required by the standard.
Okay, great. We have somebody who's their employees work with 350-degree material, and they say wearing a mask is hazard in some ways. Is there any exemption for situations like that?
Bill, do you understand what they're talking about there with the work task of 350-degree material?
Yeah. So, am I unmuted? Yeah. So my question is how close are they working each other?
Yeah.
What exactly is the hazard? I'm not as familiar with that, but what is the hazard of wearing a mask while you're doing that task?
And what is the 350-degree material?
Right, that's a good question. We really want to evaluate. There are masks out that have FR ratings that have for no electrical contractors have.
But even your clothes at working with 350-degree material is not going to self-ignite, so it's the same type of thing. So, again, I've worked in foundries before in my younger days when I was like your age, Anthony, and we we had to wear face shield and respirators. So, you know, the 350 degrees, that's not even soldering temperature. Soldering temperature is above 800. So, you know, it's not, you're not dealing really with that hot of a temperature. And then again, how many people are there? If it's just one person and nobody else is around within 6 foot, you don't have to really wear anything. So.
Okay, perfect. This one, I think we may have already addressed, but I'm going to ask it again just for clarification. So it says, where the nature of employees' work or the work area does not allow them to observe physical distancing requirements, employers shall ensure compliance with respiratory protection and personal protective equipment standards applicable to its industry. Does it mean that employees need to be entered to the respiratory protection program?
If you have employees that are wearing respirators, the N95 respirators, then 1910 or the respiratory protection standard for construction is required to be followed with the things like written plans, the medical evaluations, you know, voluntary use, all of that's included in that respiratory protection plan.
But the other side of it is, are these medium risk employees? And if they are, then they can follow C1K, which is just face masks. So.
Okay. The last question I've got on my list is, no person shall discharge or in any way discriminate against an employee who voluntarily provides and wears their own personal protective equipment, including but not limited to a respirator, face mask, face shield, gloves, if such equipment is not provided by the employer, provided the PPE does not create a greater hazard to the employee or create serious hazard for other employees. So UVA FM employees are not eligible to bring their own respirator and wear it voluntarily. If they do, how do we know about that they're medically cleared to wear it or they're wearing it properly?
The first part of the question talked about face coverings, and then the last part of the question talked about respirators. So it's two different things. You know, the standard requires that you can't discriminate up against those that bring their own face coverings. That's a totally different animal than bringing your own respirator onto a site. You know, that's something that the employer would want to look at and make sure that they're not allowing employees to bring their own respirators onto site. Just, you know, not only because that's the best practice, because like they mentioned, you know, there are things that you can't control.
That's good feedback. That is the list of submitted questions that we had. Quick reminder to everyone, most of these questions have all been uploaded to the website, to VOSHA's website under the fact sheet. So if you guys have questions, and we've already provided that link in the chat, but we'll be sure to follow up the meeting with that link as well. A lot of these questions that are being asked over and over have been addressed and answered, so that's a great resource. But if anybody else has questions that's on the call right now, please feel free to enter those into the chat while we have our experts on the line. I think someone's looking for the link to common area signage, and we can be sure to get that out to you.
We don't have a template, I guess, for that, just because that is specific to the site, because they're going to have to be including those 4 things from the standard. Again, that's the occupancy of that common area, the reminders to do social distancing, the requirements for hand washing or hand sanitizer, and then the requirements for cleaning and disinfecting. You know, whatever that site specific policy is, we don't have a template for that online. That's basically something that the employer would need to come up with.
Okay. Any other questions? Like I said, feel free to use the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself to ask a question, that's fine as well. Looks like we have one that just came in. Regarding the hazard assessment, do we need to fill out one for every site and location we have employees, or is one acceptable for our entire company?
Again, I think we covered this, it doesn't necessarily have to be per work site if you have the same employee job task at each site. So, you know, you may have 2 different construction sites that are at the same phase of construction that are having the same job task involved. You could have one. You'd need to make sure that you had a copy of that there in case the employees or any enforcement officers or anyone wanted to look at that, but it doesn't have to necessarily be per work site. because you may have, like I said, the same job task at both of those work sites.
I would also say that in order to be an effective representative sample, you would want to make sure that you are, if you're using one, using one that has the highest potential risk and hazards.
Correct.
And then can you talk a little bit about any standards surrounding taking temperatures?
Our standard doesn't cover that, but I guess the recommendation is to look at CDC guidance for that.
Okay. I'm gonna give it just a few more seconds. Any other questions that we have? And if you guys think of other stuff as we're moving throughout the rest of the meeting, feel free to either enter them in the chat or you can email Anthony or I after the meeting as well. We'll make sure that we hunt down answers for you. All right, that's what I have for the questions that were submitted.
So one of the things as this program, we're looking at the compliance dates. Tomorrow is the date that VOSHA set for us to provide this training to our employees that are at that medium, high, and very high risk. So we want to make sure that, just if you've not done so yet, just go back and make sure we're checking all the boxes. And those links can help provide that information. And one of the things that we've been challenged with is training employees. Training looks much different now, doesn't it? You cannot have a large training class. So I want to open up and see if there are any best practices for training employees. We want to space them, we want to limit the number, we want to encourage technology. So does anyone have any best practices they'd like to share for training?
I would even say also maybe open that up to training or onboarding. I know that a lot of companies have had concerns with doing new hires because of onboarding restrictions.
Yeah, I'm Trip Smith here with Emmy. We've done our training and we just had to follow the guidelines. We had training every day for about a week and a half of employees in our training room, spaced out 6 feet or more with masks and sanitizer at the door. And it was just over a 2-hour training. We also did some on sites as well in the trail, but following CDC guidelines.
Yeah, Trip, we practice the same thing, and it's been a challenge because we've acquired a lot of workforce here lately, and we've had to do more frequent training. We've set the occupancy level at the door. We've had to hold us to those standards. So
it just takes twice as long as any other training you've done. But
so the good thing is that you're encouraging that there's while a lot of technology resources have evolved right now, the in-person training, we still see that as being more effective so that you can engage your audience. It's more likely to be a Q&A and more challenges to use practical hands-on training, which is the more effective learning than just the PowerPoint presentation. So I encourage this group to ask any questions that you might have or share any solutions about training and onboarding. Because, well, let's thank our guests. Thank you, Bill, Jeremiah, and Jennifer. So if there was not anything answered, I know that Courtney and I are available, and Bill, Jennifer, and Jeremiah has been very helpful. So Courtney, you also have gathered some labor law, some AGC Virginia contacts.
That's correct. So we know that as people are trying to write their work plans and things of that nature, if they have questions or they want to make sure that they're getting legal advice, AGC of Virginia does have a list of legal counsel that will provide as a resource to everyone as well. It's kind of our version of Shop Local, right? We want to make sure that we're promoting our membership. So we'll be sure to send a list of them out as well. And they're spread out across the state. So just as an option or a resource for you.
Very good. So as we all know, we've been talking about the emergency temporary standard. And just recently, I found that Dolly had announced the intent to adopt a permanent standard for infectious disease. So in the chat box, you'll see the link to go and review that page. If you wish to enter a public comment about the proposed permanent standard, please use that form. It's open until September 25th. So, that's 1 month from now. And we really want to make sure that we're representing our organizations. If we have a comment on this, now's the time to draft that and to get it in by that September 25th date. We've all been reactive and reeling since pandemic occurred, and just want to thank you all for attending this, because our efforts right now to help ensure a healthy and safe workplace, we've really made the construction site, these essential business, the employees have a safer place to come to. So during the COVID crisis, it's really the 40 hours we spend together are the safest and amongst this exposure to COVID. So I want to thank you all for your attendance and for your engagement in this committee. So one of the things, as we've been talking about, I don't know, COVID-19, did you hear about it? One of the things we have not been talking about is what we're doing to de-stress, to shake off that COVID. So it's interesting, Shalomith and I were talking, she asked me, what are you doing to stay sane? How are you not going crazy amongst all this? And I know that everyone who owns this feels the same way. We've been living this. So we have to find some sort of way to de-stress. Shalomith shared that hers, and she's open to let me share that for her, is Netflix and wine. So mine has been, Virginia's just beautiful with the outdoors, so I've been staying active that way. I wanted to ask, Laura Duckworth, are you out there? So I want to ask, see what others are doing to de-stress. Okay. How about, Courtney, do you want to go? Well,
Sure.
open it up.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of similar. Unlike most people in construction, I sit in an office behind a computer most of the day. So de-stressing for me is getting outside. My husband and I really enjoy playing disc golf or going to the river, and just adopted a new puppy. So that's been keeping our mind kind of fresh off of work topics. So that's been nice.
That's great.
I'm sure with the 32 people that are on the call that surely someone can unmute themselves and talk a little bit about what they've been doing to keep their mind sane.
So this is George Campo, and we go for long walks along the river, along the Elizabeth River. So that, and we do a puzzle. We're on our 12th puzzle, I think.
12th, I like that.
That'll get your mind off of all this. That's good.
You're gonna run out of puzzles before winter hits, George. You better slow down.
We went and bought 2 more on Sunday.
So everybody on the line, you need to mail George a puzzle.
So there's also a company called Portrait Puzzle, where you make your own collage. So we do it for every trip we go on. We take and make a collage. And so we've gone back and reworked some of those old puzzles we made years ago for all of our old trips. But we've been through all those, and now we went and got a puzzle on, I think we're doing Venice right now. And I think we just did Santorini. I forgot what the next one we got is. Oh, things that I owned one of those. So it's all these pictures of things that we grew up as a kid, like Lincoln Logs and, stuff that we had as kids. So that's, I owned that is the name of the puzzle.
That's great, George. I love it. I wrote that down, Portrait Puzzle. And so next time you want to go to Venice, you can take me along. I'll be hiding in the picture as like a Where's Waldo. It'll be a hunt too. So it's 3 in 1.
Yeah. So puzzles are great.
Good.
Anything
Ooh,
else? I'm sure we have some more great ideas to stay sane.
Hey, Anthony, this is Ken Proct. How are you?
Hey, Ken.
Just trying to spend as much time outside and going camping and spending time in the garden and listening to Frank Sinatra records.
Yeah, he can soothe you. So that's cool. Anytime, if you have extra vegetables, that just send them my way. I'll help you dispose of them.
My wife's been canning like you wouldn't believe.
Okay.
that's a good one. I think it's also, important. It's a good opportunity for us to mention that you don't realize sometimes the amount of stress that this puts on you, even subconsciously, including your employees as well. And there are really disturbing numbers on the amount of, on the statistics and the percentage of construction employees that suffer with depression or suicidal thoughts and things of that nature. And it's good to have the lighthearted conversations now of what we're doing to de-stress and off hours, but also just a reminder that on hours, we need to make sure that we're checking in with our employers and seeing where their headspace is at. We knew that this was going to be an issue back when all this started. So I will say that AGC has pulled together some resources for employers and companies, different toolbox talks and things of that nature that talk about your mental health and your emotional safety that we can provide to employers. We partner with a company called Shepherd Care, who is Eric Kieselball is a mental health professional, and he's given us some resources to be able to use. So we're happy to get you connected with Shepherd Care and with Eric Kieselball, or provide you those free resources that he's given us, just to kind of work into some of your training as well.
Thank you, Courtney. Anyone else going once, going twice about fun things you're doing to stay healthy, mentally, physically, emotionally during this time?
Am I live or not?
You are, Scott.
Yeah,
I heard the other day of a group game, and I don't know whether you have to stay 6 feet apart to play this and wear masks and whatever, but take a 500-piece puzzle that's complete and then divide it into maybe 30-piece sections and bag each group of 30 pieces and then pass them out to people. Now you have something that's not going to be stressful to put together because they all fit in one section of the puzzle. And then when you get several sections together, you can complete your puzzle and it becomes a fun group activity.
I like that.
that's cool. Yeah.
Seems like a good team building activity. So George, you can send us puzzles with your face on them, and we'll break them up and send them around.
So as to reiterate what Courtney said, CDC also has mental health tools and resources. So I'll share that in the link as well. And during this time, the one thing we really want to be sure of is that we're being empathetic to the people that we care about in the field. They're going through this process as well. And, we just got through record heat wave and having to wear a face covering. It's been really challenging to comply and stay safe, to do both of those. They're not synonymous. So we really want to continue to be empathetic and listening and asking, how our team is dealing with this and providing resources. Because people are going, as Courtney mentioned, it's an all-time high with the mental stress. So share your story, open up a conversation, and listen to what your team's doing. It'll be fun. It'll bring a smile during this time. So I also wanted to open the floor up to see, do any members have any questions on how we can help, how the AGC of Virginia can help you through this process? So last month we had Courtney Malveaux talk through the new regulations. This month we have Virginia OSHA be part of the Q&A. So I want to open it up and say for next month, is there anything we need to do in preparation for that meeting or anything in between that we can do to help ensure your safety and compliance? Well, if you think of something, just put it in the chat, send it in an email, and we will be responsive. So there are some events that are coming up quickly to prepare for. Courtney, I'll let you start talking about Construction Safety Week.
Sure. So Construction Safety Week is scheduled for September 14th through the 18th. This has been a national event that AGC of America is part of, which means AGC chapters, such as AGC of Virginia, is a part of as well. And there are tons of resources for people to be able to get involved in the Safety Week. And really, it's all, the main goal is to highlight what you and your companies are doing to celebrate all that you've been through and all of the preparedness that you guys do throughout the year. And then also to bring awareness to the broader community. So there are opportunities to submit any type of events or safety stand downs that you're doing, certain practices that you're doing. We can submit those to the media to get media coverage. I think everybody's looking for some positive media coverage for the construction industry. And then there's also resources like Toolbox Talks and videos that you can use to encourage your employees. There's social media posts and banners. There's actually a whole website that's dedicated with all those types of topics and resources. And I know that the AGC of Virginia will be sending those out with members and encouraging member participation across the state. So please be on the lookout for that.
Thank you. We did get a question from Betty that she asked, will AGC of Virginia make a statement regarding the proposed permanent standard? And as you all know, the AGC of Virginia has, they're active legislatively at what goes on for Virginia regulations to ensure that it is a practical, common sense way to help Virginia business stay safe and healthy. And I'm sure in some way the AGC of Virginia is already being active on this. I'm not sure to answer your question yes or no, but we will be in touch and follow up. So good question. But we still encourage, do not rely on AGC of Virginia. Let your voice be heard. So if you're on this call and you're not at the executive level, we encourage you to speak with your executive level to ensure that on behalf of your organization, you're making a statement to Virginia OSHA about this proposed permanent standard. There's one other thing, an AGC of America as the National Construction Safety Excellence Awards. So Courtney, I just popped this one up on you, but I'm gonna, I love sending links in that little chat box. I don't know if you can get that on the recording, but it's full of links. And in that chat section, you'll see that link to apply. And it's a national program. And you can look at last year's award winners and previous year award winners, where it talks about programs and policies and practices they put in place in order to be recognized at the national level. So it really helps as a benchmark or even a target for success in environmental health and safety. So look through that document when you have time, and if you have time to recognize your organization. October 1st applications are going to be open, and they're going to be open through December 15th.
If memory serves me right, didn't Perry Engineering recently win one of those CSEA awards? I think Ken's on the line.
Yes, we did. We've won it the last 2 years. I would really encourage everyone to go through the application process for that, because it's sort of like applying for VPP or OSHA Challenge or Virginia Best. It really forces you to evaluate your safety program and what you're doing and best practices and all of that. So it's a good exercise just to go through the application process.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And so, like Anthony said, we're going to encourage people to go through that process and apply. We want to, keep Virginia on the map and under the noses of AGC of America. And so if you have more questions on how to apply or what the process looks like, then you've got a community of people here that have done it before that you can kind of rely on and trust, use them as a brain trust. So please do that.
So, in closing, there's so much information, and recently there was a study that came out from Duke about the net gaiters being less effective than not wearing a face covering at all. And then Virginia Tech put their own study out. So it's really neat to see as these studies come out. So we want to encourage people to go to the Microsoft Teams site. We're going to gravitate towards that from Zoom, knock on wood. But one thing that is going to change is the fourth Friday at 11 a.m. We're going to move this Tuesday meeting to the fourth Friday in the essence of getting key personnel to be able to attend. So we want you to just mark your calendars for that. Just be aware of that. There are also lots of other information and resources available. Fleet safety, we mentioned it last time that, that's still our greatest exposure as an organization is traveling to and from work. So we want to encourage that we're staying safe in that. And Drive Smarter Virginia is a great organization that's providing free training, free resources available. So if you'd like more information on that, please send me an email, send Courtney an email. We can get you contacted with Drive Smarter Virginia. So Courtney, do you have anything in closing?
No, I know it's a lot of information. So looking forward to following up with all the resources and links that we mentioned. And otherwise, we're looking forward to next month's meeting, which I believe is September 25th. We'll be sure to send out registration links for that in the coming week or two.
Real quick before you go, Courtney.
Yes, sir.
In what Andy posted about Construction Week, it says 10/14 to 10/18. Isn't it 9/14 September?
That should, you're right. It should be.
Good
So
catch.
his little post it says 10/14 to 18.
Oh, you know what that is? I think that the 10/14 is the National Safety Stand Down.
Okay, excuse me, my mistake.
No, it's. I'm glad you pointed it out because it gets confusing. And then the other one is the National Safety Awareness Week. We'll be sure to clarify in the notes we send out. I appreciate you mentioning it.
Switch. Thank you, George. My puzzles only have 4 pieces. So that's, thank you for your attention to detail. Thank everyone for exercising and actively caring for people's health and wellness during this time. We really are making a difference. I know we can't see it on our day in, day out, but just continue to be there for your people and for your organization. We will get through this stronger together. So until next month, we thank you all for your time.
Thank you all.